Welcome to the Learnfast CSS 2020 course. In this course we'll be covering the art of styling web pages, and in this lecture we'll also be covering CSS gradients and attributes and colors. The contents of this course are as follows. We'll be covering the CSS features, gradients, browser prefixes, positioning, pseudo classes, shortcuts, selector attributes, box model sizing, background clips, background origin, background sizing, and how to do multiple backgrounds, how to change border color property, how to change border radius properties. CSS gradients. The concept. You can use a gradient, a gradual change from one color to another over a short space instead of pictures. For example, in this CSS code that we have here, we're applying the linear gradient function, which in CSS is like a normal function in JavaScript. It's actually a function. You pass it parameters to control the behavior of CSS. So we start off with a style tag, then we have our class reference, and then we go down to, we set the color green, we have a background of yellow, then we can say the background, and then we use our gradient function where we say linear gradient starts from the top. The first color, starting color is #CB0 and the finishing color is #FF0. So this is using RGB notation to represent colors. Also, further down below we've got another linear gradient function, which is the same as above. So we've got another one down here. We've got moz. Background is moz-linear gradient. So this function applies to the Mozilla browser only, and it is, again, the parameters are the same. In brackets we have top CB0 FF0. WebKit is another browser function, and then we have O for Opera. WebKit is the Apple browser. Then we have O for Opera, and then we have MS for Microsoft. That's because different vendors, different companies define CSS rendering on their browser in different ways. So we need a special function to take our CSS function and then convert it into their own functions. CSS gradients. So in the browser, if we have a look at the display, what we've done is we've got two colors. So we've got some text called yellow slide gradient 1A, and we're starting off with a color at the top and it's going to the bottom, which is a darker version of yellow going down to a lighter version of yellow. So again, if we have a look at this, the breakdown of the CSS code. Looking at the nodes, we've got the gradient start point. In the linear gradient function, linear gradient top CB0 FF0, you can tell CSS where to start the color gradient. For example, you can tell it to start at the top, or you can tell it to start from the bottom and go up. You can tell it to start from the left and go right, or you can tell it to start at the right and go left, and then you can tell it to start at the center and go outwards. So we can also, in CSS gradient function, we can have multiple colors in a range. So in the linear gradient function we can have linear gradient top CB0FF0, but we can also give it multiple colors. We can say linear gradient top CB0FF0 and then CB1FF5. So yeah, so that will change the color from one color to another, and then it will change that color again to the next color, and it will split the screen into the number of colors there are. So if there's 4 colors, it will split that space into 4 colors. Okay, let's go and have a look at CSS gradients in our tutorials. So if we go into the W3 Schools website, and then we can have a look for gradients. So let's have a look for gradients, CSS gradient. Okay, let's have another look at CSS gradients. Go to the CSS, and then we say okay, here we are. This is the CSS Gradients section in w3schools.com. And as you can see from here, we've got a gradient being applied to this blue background. It starts from a different color in the top left hand corner, and then to the bottom right it goes to a different color. So we can apply CSS gradients, let you apply smooth transitions between 2 or more specified colors. And there's 2 types of colors, gradients. There's linear gradients and there's radial gradients, which start from the center and go out. So linear and radial gradients. CSS linear gradients. To create a linear gradient, you must define at least 2 color stops. Color stops are the colors you want to render smooth transitions among. You can also set a starting point and direction or angle along with the gradient effect. For example, we can say background image is a linear gradient and give it parameters of the direction, and then the color 1, starting color, next color, and next color, and so on. So if we do a linear gradient top to bottom as shown here, so if you provide this is the default function, so the following example here shows going from red to yellow, and you can see the gradient is quite nice. And the way this is done is using this gradient ID, which is here, and we can do in CSS, we can say gradient ID is set to background image, is set to linear gradient, and then we give it 2 colors. So we haven't given a direction here. So if you don't give it a direction, then it will automatically go from top to bottom by default. So if we try this out, we can see what's going on. So in here we've got the linear gradient going from, in our browser, from top to bottom. This linear gradient starts at the top and it starts red, transitioning to yellow. So looking in our HTML code, we have the gradient. Let's have a look. If we have a look at the HTML, we can see that we're starting off with style tag in our HTML, doc type HTML. When we go to our head tag, then we go to our style tag, and then we go to our ID selector, which is #grad1, selects the ID with grad1. Then we go to height 200, and we set that to height 200 pixels, and we set the background color to red, and then down below we have got background image, and we set the linear gradient of that to red and yellow. And this is what we here have on this side. So if we, for example, if we have this red and linear gradient, red and yellow, if we change this to green, we can see the result of what's happening. If we change that to green and we say update, we've gone from red to green, which is pretty horrible. So let's go to red to blue. That'll be a bit nicer. This is much nicer, so you go red going to blue. So that's CSS Gradients. Also in CSS Gradients, we've got the option to go from left to right. So linear gradient, go left to right. Follow example shows a linear gradient that starts from the left and it starts red, transitioning to yellow. So starting from the left, from red, going to yellow. Again, we can do an example here, so we can try this ourselves. So what we have here is we set our background image to linear gradient, and we say go to, the direction is going to the right. So starting from the left, go to the right, and start from red and go to yellow colors. Okay, let's try this ourselves. Again, in this example, we've got color going from red to yellow, and we using the linear gradient function here, and we're going from, we're saying the direction is go to the right, and then we say start off with the red and then finish with the yellow color. Let's get a bigger option on that. Okay, let's go to next one. So if we want a diagonal gradient, we can say linear gradient diagonal, And you can make the diagonal gradient diagonally by specifying both the horizontal and the vertical starting positions. The following example shows a linear gradient that starts at the top left and goes to the bottom right. Starts red and transitioning to yellow. So top left corner red, go bottom right corner yellow. And in our CSS, we've got linear gradient goes to the bottom right, and it's starting with yellow and going then finishing in yellow, starting with red and finishing in yellow. You can also use angles. If you want more control over the direction of the gradient, you can define an angle instead of the predefined directions. So you can do top to bottom, to top, to right, to left, to bottom right. And the syntax for this is as follows. You say background image, and then you say the linear gradient function, and then you say the angle that you want to be used, and then you give it a range of colors, colors to 1, color 2, and so on. The angle is specified as an angle between the horizontal line and the gradient line. So the angle of the horizontal line is 0, and as you drop the angle indicator, you can work out the angle. In this example here, we've got gradient going from yellow to red on the right. So what we've done here is background image, linear gradient, we say 90, we say the linear gradient is minus 90 degrees, so that's saying drop 90 degrees and start with the red and finish with the yellow. So if we, with the 90 degrees, if we start here at the top, and then we drop, then we start off with the red, and then we finish with the yellow. So this is going in the opposite direction to what we had before. Also, you can use multiple colors, and the following example shows a gradient with multiple colors. So as we can see in this example here, we're going from red to yellow to green, and our linear gradient function says start off with the red, then go to yellow, and then go to green, and this is starting from top to bottom. So top is red, middle is yellow, bottom is green. This example here is creating a gradient from left to right, which looks quite amazing. Start off with a red, go to yellow, go to green, go to blue, go to purple or violet. And how we do that is by using the linear gradient function, and we say go to the right. That means from the left go to the right. Start with red color, then go to orange, then go to yellow, then go to green, then go to blue, then go to indigo, then go to violet. And as we can see, from the left hand side to the right hand side, the screen is divided into equal proportions, and each color is transitioning from one color to the next color in that range. You can also use transparencies in CSS. The way this works is CSS gradients support transparency, which can be used to create fading effects. So to add a transparency, we use the RGBA function, and the RGBA function is basically red, green, blue, and the fading function. And A is the amount of transparency that we provide to the color that we're defining. So we have, to add transparency, we use the RGBA function to define the color stops. The RGBA function can be valued from 0 to 1, and the value of fully transparent is 0, and fully opaque is 0, and fully transparent is 1, which means there's no transparency. So 1 indicates full color, no transparency. In this example here, we're going from left to right, so we're starting off with transparency at 0, so that's 100% transparency. And when we get to the middle, and when we get to the end, to the right hand side, we have the transparency of 1 or 0%, and that means that all we see is just pure color red. We see no transparency being applied. How do we apply this? We can apply this using the background image, yeah, and the linear gradient function, and we say go to the right, and we say starting color is RGBA, and then finishing color is RGBA. 255001. Starting color is 255000. So we start off with no red. That means it's fully transparent. There's no color at all. We can see through the red and there's nothing there. And we get to the right hand side and it's no, we can't see through the red, and it's just full color, no transparency. We can repeat gradients in, across or down on the web page, and we can specify a repeating linear gradient function, and that is shown here. We've got repeating colors going from red, yellow to green, 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 in 5 bands, 5 rows across the screen from left to right. So that's repeating the colors down as you go down the web page. An example of a repeating linear gradient is this. We start off with a background image, so we say select the background image. We're going to be using repeating linear gradient, and we say use red, then yellow 10%, then green 20%. So that's saying start off with a red color, then go to yellow for 10% of the time, and then go to green for 20% of the time. And that is going to be repeated down the web page. We can also do CSS radial gradients, which is starting from the center, moving out. A radial gradient is defined by where its center point is. To create a radial gradient, you must define at least 2 color point stops, or color points. And the syntax for this is as follows. You select the background image, and then you select the radial gradient function, which is radial gradient, and then you say give it a shape, size and position, and you have start color and end color. So for example, in this picture here, we've got starting with red, and then we've got an oval shape, and then we'll go to yellow, and then we end in green. So this is using a radial gradient with evenly spaced color stops, and this is the default. And if we look at our CSS code, we've got select the background image, select the radial gradient function, and then we say start off with red in the middle, then go to yellow, then go to green. And this is what we have shown here. You can use the radial gradient function with differently spaced color stops as shown here. So we're starting off with red, a small red, then we've got a little bit of yellow, and then we've got a lot of green. So how do we specify that? So we say the radial gradient function is here, and then we say red is only going to take up 5% of the width of the space, yellow is going to take up 15%, and green is going to take up 60%, and that splits the your range from the center to the edge of the box so you've got 100% from going from the center to the edge of the web page, or your container, or your background image, or your box in the CSS box model. So we say give the red 5% here, we say give the yellow 15%, and we say give the green 60%, and that gives you this image here. We can set the shape of we can set the shape of the gradient, and the shape parameter defines the gradient shape. It can take values of circle or ellipse, and the default value is ellipse, as we saw earlier on. Here we've got an ellipse because we haven't told it which shape to take. So you can have either ellipse or circle. And looking at the CSS, we've got radial gradient. First parameter is circle, and that's the shape that we wanted to take. And we say start off with red, then go to yellow, then go to green. You can also use different sort of side keywords if you like. Use of different size keywords. So the size parameter defines the size of the gradient, and it can take 4 values, and these values are as follows. We can say the closest side, or the farthest side, or the closest corner. We'll start off with the closest side, start off with the farthest side, start off with the closest corner, start off with the farthest corner. A radial gradient with different size keywords is as follows. A radial gradient is function, so we say the closest side at 60%, then it's 55%, and then we have colors going from red to yellow to black. Let's try this out ourselves. So if we try this out ourselves and see what happens. So we're starting off here, we're starting off on the first function, so it's closest side 60%, which is on the left, and then it goes to 55%, and we have red, yellow and black. So looking at this picture here, we have 60% here, and then we have 55%, and then we're going from the radial function, we're going from red in the beginning center, then to yellow, and then to black. But the closest side is on the left, which is 60%, and then the next color is 55%. Okay, we can do a repeating function on the radial gradient as well. So repeating the radial gradient. Repeating the radial gradient function is used to repeat radial gradients, and this picture shows it very nicely. We start off with the red, we go to the yellow, and then we go to the green, and then it's repeated all the way round until it fills up the whole box. So the way we specify this is we say repeating radial gradient, and we give it colors. We say red, start off with red, go to yellow 10% of the time, space, and then green 15% of the space. So yeah, so that's all for CSS gradients. Okay, moving on to CSS Browser Prefixes. Concept: because not all browsers follow the same standards 100%, you will have to use browser-specific prefixes to tell the browser's toolkit which function to use for that browser. This is because the different companies like Apple and Microsoft and Google, they have different developers and different internal standards for the CSS interpretation and how it's presented on the web page. And sometimes not all of the companies actually implement all of the functions. So where Microsoft hasn't implemented a particular function, what we can use is we can use a browser prefix, and then CSS libraries will be loaded onto your computer for free. For example, Bootstrap and other libraries that you can get freely available open source libraries and you can download and install on your computer. And then what will happen is the function that applies to the Microsoft browser will be run, and then it will be filled in by these external libraries, and Microsoft will hopefully one day implement that functionality the same way as the CSS standards require. So that's the reason for browser prefixes in CSS. It tells CSS where it should go in the browser, or it tells CSS for a particular browser use this function, otherwise just use the standard function. So for example, if we have a look at these, we've got -moz- for the Mozilla Firefox browser, we've got WebKit for the Apple browser, we've got O for the Opera browser, and we've got MS for the Microsoft Internet Explorer browser. Now in the CSS code, we can say the browser specific code is shown as follows. For example, the background linear gradient function that we saw earlier has a prefix of moz. So this is telling the CSS that if you're using a Mozilla browser, then use the Mozilla gradient function, and CSS will know where to find that in the Mozilla browser libraries. And the same thing with WebKit for Apple, with O for Opera, and MS for Microsoft. Otherwise, if you just have a normal background linear gradient function, then CSS will try to use that one first. And if it works, fine. If it doesn't work, then it will try and find a matching browser prefix. And then if that doesn't work, then it will default to, usually it will default to not being rendered, and the rule will be ignored. Let's have a look at the W3 scores page for that. So we go to W3 scores and we go to the top and we say search. We want to search for browser prefix, and it says download CSS browser support. So this is CSS support for different browsers. So the CSS browser support here, the reference guide in W3 schools is shown here. CSS reference with browser support. The table below lists all the CSS properties and how each property is supported in different browsers. The number to the right of the browser icon indicates which browser version of the property was first supported. So as you can see here, these are all CSS properties on the left hand side, and on the right we've got the different browsers listed, and it's telling you the version number. So for example, Internet Explorer version 11, it supports line content property of CSS. Firefox version 28 supports align content. Also, align content is supported by Chrome browser version 21, by Safari browser, which is Apple, version 9, and Opera browser version 12.1. The all property is only supported by Firefox, Chrome, and Opera. So this is a very good place to check if you're using a particular CSS property, if it's going to be supported by your favorite browser. And it may affect your users who are using the web application, because if the web property is missing from your browser, from the browser that they're using, then they may not get a very good experience browsing the internet or the web page that you've designed that's using these properties. Okay, CSS Positioning of Elements. Concept. Normally an element's position on the display screen will be determined by how the browser places the element in the web page when it is rendering it. With HTML elements displayed as they flow out onto the web page screen, one after the other, however, you can tell the web browser engine to place the element at a particular point, and so ignore the flow of the default flow of the web page. Positioning types. Now, there's different types of kinds of position that you can apply to on a web page. You can apply absolute positioning, where you place on a location on the web page relative to the top corner of the web page. So starting from the top left hand corner, go down X pixels, go across Y pixels. Or you can have a fixed location. So this is relative to the browser window. So we can say on this web page itself, place the item on the web page relative to the top left hand corner of the browser window. And then finally we've got relative placing, where we can place the item relative to where it would have been otherwise by default. So absolute is the browser window, and fixed is the web page, particular individual web page, and relative is on the individual web page, place it somewhere on the web page different to what would be applied normally. Positioning of elements. So we can position elements as follows. We can say position at the top, at the right, at the bottom, at the left and side of the page. Absolute positioning is shown as follows. We can do CSS code absolute positioning place the ID top banner at position absolute, which means according to the browser window at the top we go 250 pixels, and the other dimension we go 350 pixels. Relative, we can place relative to the web page where it would normally be. So we can say top of it will be 35 pixels, and the left hand side of it will be from the top come down 35 pixels, from the left go across 35 pixels. Got fixed, and the fixed is fixed on the from top left hand corner, so we go down from the top, we go down 35 pixels, and from the left we go across 35 pixels. Okay, let's have a look at CSS Pseudo Classes. The concept is that the pseudo class is it's not a physical or a real or a literal class. I mean, the class, you can't, find an element or a HTML element that, applies to it. For example, these classes don't have real CSS HTML properties, but they are classes that are derived from HTML elements and describe some kind of attribute or property of the HTML element, which is not available in raw HTML or in the document object model. So the pseudo classes types of selectors and classes do not correspond to any real HTML elements. They do not use the DOM, the document object model, but they do work with the way they work depends on the state or position of the element. The pseudo classes are appended to the usual selectors in CSS and actually modify their behavior in some way. So you have your normal selectors, and then you add a pseudo class to it which modifies its behavior. For example, if you want to pseudo class types, so for example, if you wanted to have if you had some text, a paragraph of text, and you wanted to modify the first letter, make it larger, then you could say first dash letter and use that pseudo class to change the first letter, make it into a different color or make it much larger than normal. You can apply the same thing to the first line of text. You can apply to a link, a hyperlink. You can change the color or the state of it. You can say if the hyperlink's been visited, then change the color of it. If the hyperlink has got the mouse hovering over it, then change the color of it. Okay, in our CSS code, we've got applies first rule applies rule to the first letter of the following text. So for the class starting with called capital letter, we apply the pseudo class first letter by using the colon separator, and then down below we've got our CSS code that we want to apply to the first letter. On this one we've got a hyperlink, A is an anchor, and then colon we put link, so this is a pseudo class, and we say put it color yellow, again anchor, colon, pseudo class visited. If that link has been visited or clicked already, then put it down, put it with a color of red. On this one we've got CSS code when the mouse is over the element or hovering over the element. A is your anchor and hover is the pseudo class. And so if your mouse is over the link and hyperlink, we change its color to yellow and the background color to green. Again, we've got another state here. When the element is being mouse clicked, so when you have your mouse over the hyperlink and you're clicking it and the mouse button is pressed down, then that is known as the active state. And when that happens, so when you click on the hyperlink, you can get it to change color. You can make it color orange and background blue. Okay, CSS shortcuts. The concept here is to save time and for ease of use. Collections of CSS properties can be simplified by using a shorter property name. For example, we can, in the shortcut for border, we can have border :short for border width, comma border style, comma border color. The way that works is we use border, we don't use border width, border style and border color. And after border we put colon and then we put 3 parameters and they correspond to the border width, the border style and the border color. For example, if we're using a CSS long format, we can have border width is 3 pixels, border style is dotted, border color is yellow. But if we're using a shortcut, we can say CSS code using CSS using shortcuts. We've got just the border, colon, and then first we have 3 pixels, and then we have 3 pixels as size, dotted is the style, and then yellow is the color. So this saves a lot of typing. Okay, CSS shortcuts. The concept here is to save time and for ease of use. Collections of CSS properties can be simplified by using a shorter property name. For example, we can, in the shortcut for border, we can have border :short for border width, comma border style, comma border color. The way that works is we use border, we don't use border width, border style and border color. And after border we put colon and then we put 3 parameters and they correspond to the border width, the border style and the border color. For example, if we're using a CSS long format, we can have border width is 3 pixels, border style is dotted, border color is yellow. But if we're using a shortcut, we can say CSS code using CSS using shortcuts. We've got just the border, colon, and then first we have 3 pixels, and then we have 3 pixels as size, dotted is the style, and then yellow is the color. So this saves a lot of typing. Okay, moving on to CSS attributes. There are various CSS selector types and attributes available, and this is a list of all of them. So we have a selector type and attributes. So we have a universal selector, which can be like star, and then your CSS rules in brackets. We have an element selector, which can be, for example, A for anchor or hyperlink. We can have a class selector where we use a dot and then the class name. We can have the ID selector where we have the hash and the ID name. We can have a descendant selector where we have the element and then another element which is descendant from that. We can have the child selector where we have the element and the greater than sign and then another element. So the P element is the child of the div element, or is contained within the div element. We can have adjacent siblings. Siblings are child elements that are next to each other at the same level within the containing element. For example, we can have a span element which contains paragraph elements, and these paragraph elements will be adjacent siblings. We can have an attribute, so we can select by attribute. So we can say a link, anchor link, which has the, we use square brackets to select the attribute, and we say select all anchor links with the style attribute of style equals color green. So all the styles, all of those anchor links that have the text style equals color green inside them will be selected by this rule, with this selector. Pseudo class, as mentioned before, we can use pseudo classes. So we can have the anchor link, all anchor links that are in the active condition state. And pseudo element is where we can use the pseudo class. So this is like for in the paragraph, we select the first letter. In the paragraph, we select the first letter. And of the paragraph, and then we can apply color or formatting to it as required. Okay, CSS Box Model Sizing. And the concept here is that you can specify that the CSS element size includes the padding and the border or not. Because sometimes if you're specifying a number of pixels in CSS, you're assuming that the size that you're talking about is the whole, is the whole element. But that normally you have padding and border which is added onto your normal size or subtracted from it. So you can specify whether to include the padding and the border size or not in the sizes that you're going to stipulate. There's two ways you can do this, the box model sizing options. So you can say include padding and border, and for that you do use set box sizing to border box in your CSS. Or you can say include only content, so set the box sizing to content box. So the sizes that you specify will only refer to the content in the box, not the borders. Okay, CSS Background Clips. The concept here is that you can set the background of a CSS element using the background clip property. For example, you can put pictures and things like videos in the background of your element. Okay, so the CSS background works in, we have three properties that we can apply here. So we can say fill up to and including the border. So that sets the background clip is border box. We can say fill up to and include the padding. So we say background clip is a padding box, and then we can say fill up to and include the content only. So background clips only goes as far as the content box. Okay, we can set the CSS Background Origin point as well. So the concept here is that you can set the top left hand corner origin of the background of a CSS element using the Background Origin property. So if you're setting a picture in the background of your element, you can control where the picture starts from the top left hand corner, and you can give it a position where you want the picture to start from. So again, we can use these different options. CSS Background Origin options we can use to include the border. We say Background Origin includes a border, and we say border box. We can say the background includes a padding only, so we say the Background Origin is a padding box, and then we can say, if you just want the content box, we can say the Background Origin is a content box only, as before. Okay, CSS Background Sizing. The concept here is that you can set the size of the background of a CSS element using the Background Size property. So if you have a picture in the background of your element, you can change the size of the picture also. So the way you do this is you set the background image size property. So you say background size, and you give it two parameters: width is pixels and height in pixels. You can give it one parameter for shortness. We can say the background size is 1px, so that will be 1 px in the width and 1px in the height. We can set the only one of the parameters, and we can say for example background size, the width takes up 100%, means use up the full width, and set the height to the height number of parameters, pixels. You can also use the background size to set the width number of pixels, and we say the height takes up the full height of the box. Okay, CSS Border Colors. The concept here is that you can set the CSS Border Color properties in different ways. For example, set the border color value top border property, so that the border has 4 sides normally, top and bottom, left and right. So we can say border top color, set it to green. We can say border on the bottom color, set it to yellow. Border on the left hand side color we set to red, and then border on the right hand side we set the color to orange. We can also just use a brief version, which is border color, and then we can give it 4 colors left, starting from the top. So we go top, right, bottom, left. Saves a lot of space. Okay, CSS Border Radius. This is referring to the corners of your box. You can set a radius so that instead of having a sharp right angle corner on your box, it can be curved, and that makes it look a little bit softer. The concept is you can set the CSS border radius properties in different ways. And if we start off, for example, set border all corners radius value. So what we do is we say border radius 30 pixels, and that will give the corners of your box a 30 pixel radius. We can also have set different values for each corner. We can say 5, 20, 35 pixels. We can say in one corner only, so we say border radius top left 30 pixels, say top right 35 pixels, border radius bottom right 35 pixels, border radius bottom left 35 pixels. So it gives you fine tuning of your border radiuses. Thanks very much. That was all of the content that we're going to cover in this part of the course. Thanks for watching our channel. Please like and subscribe to our channel so we can bring you more amazing educational content. Our channel is Bain's Infotech World, where to learn is to earn more. We'll see you next time. You have been watching the Learnfast CSS 2020 course, The Art of Styling Web Pages, covering CSS gradients, attributes and colors. Have a nice day.